What a great song to know that I am a prize and that all the power that I need is within me right now, right here, in this moment. Today is Palm Sunday, as Gary so beautifully pointed out to us, and we all hold our spiritual palms and honor each other. It's also the very last Sunday of Lent. Is everybody sad to let go of the season of Lent? I think they just named it wrong because it's such an amazing time of the year. It's an amazing spiritual season. It is, according to Charles Fillmore, our co-founder, a time when we fast from criticism and condemnation. It's a time that we fast from belief and limitation. You know, it would be the equivalent if the rest of the year we were forced to drink big amounts of cod liver oil and then drag heavy weights on our ankles. And then comes this season of Lent where we get to give that up, to fast. We no longer have to take in that smelly stuff. We no longer have to drag those heavy weights. Instead, we can focus on love and abundance. I wouldn't name that Lent. I'd find a different name for it, right? But that's the name we've got. This is the season we've been celebrating. So if you haven't gotten on board, then this is the final week. Really give up all that yucky stuff. That self-critic has got to be quiet for another week. That inner voice that condemns those other drivers and, you know, whoever else you might be bumping into, that voice gets to be silent for one more week. All of those fears that I might not be enough, or there might not be enough, they get to be put away in the drawer somewhere for the rest of the week. And instead, we focus our time and energy on love and on abundance and on knowing that in the completion of this season, we have Easter, where we claim the fullness of the Christ light that shines within us and is the very truth of us. You'll be amazed in this journey through unity that Lent will end up being your favorite season of the year. Someone will say to you, "What's your favorite season?" And you'll say, "Lent," right? Maybe, maybe not. So I told Teresa that I would be talking about the path because I was fully intending to do that today. And then realized that it was far too big, that I needed many more Sundays to talk about what I wanted to talk about. And so I reflected on what we've been doing in this season of Lent, and I realized that I was on a Buddhist journey without being fully conscious of being on a Buddhist journey. Right speech comes from Buddhist teaching, and that's what we'll focus on today. But what we've done over the past few weeks, we've talked about keeping our thoughts aligned with truth and making sure that our thoughts are aligned with love, with abundance, and we make sure that we stay away from thinking things like limitation or condemnation or criticism. We've talked about right view. Last week we talked about seeing it right, seeing through the eyes of wisdom as a starting point, because when we see a situation right, when we see ourselves right, then that guides us on our path. Well, right thought and right view are a part of Buddha's teaching. Buddha taught one major teaching, and that was there is suffering and there is a way out of suffering. There is a path through which we become free of suffering. And the path that he taught that leads us out of this suffering is called the Eightfold Path in Buddhism. And right thought, right view, right speech are part of that Eightfold Path. The symbol for that path looks like this. And it's a great symbol because otherwise we might get confused and we think that, well, we have to get right thinking down pat before we can work on right view. And then once we've got right view figured out and right thinking figured out, we can move on to right speech. And that's not how it works in life. We get all of it to work on all at once. So the spokes of the wheel give that idea that it's a process that we learn how to do that from our center, from the very center of our being. And when we do the practice, it brings us back to the center of our being. I don't know if you can read that. My eyes, so if I read this funny, correct me. Starting at the top and going clockwise, right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Now, if you're familiar with this wheel or if you've seen it in other places, this might look a little different because of translation differences. Sometimes some of these get named differently. For example, right thought gets named as right intention sometimes, but it's really the same part of the path, the same teaching. And that wheel sometimes artistically looks different. This is one of my favorite renditions of that because the other one still made it seem like each spoke was separate. When I was working on right view, I'd be only working on right view. And it doesn't work like that because it all blends. One becomes the other. And I might be consciously working on the way I see my world, but that at the same time I'm doing that, it's changing how I'm thinking about my world. And it might also change how I speak throughout the day. So it's all interwoven, and that's a beautiful depiction of that. So right speech is what we're focusing on today. In unity, we would say speaking truth, right? I mean, it's the same thing, different languaging. But in Buddhism, right speech is wise speech that gives rise to peace and happiness and freedom from suffering. And not only does it give rise to that peace and happiness and freedom from suffering for me, but when I am engaged in right speech, I am blessed in that way, and so are you. It contributes to your peace and happiness and freedom from suffering. Buddhists like sometimes to frame things in the negative more than unity does, but another description that is found in Buddhist writings, and this is actually straight from the Buddhist teachings, that right speech is fasting or abstaining from false speech, harsh speech, and idle chatter. A little bit of overlap there with Charles Fillmore, right? I really got that last part, the idle chatter, after my first 10 days silent retreat at a Buddhist retreat center. And I don't know if I ever would have chosen to start that way, but that was their rule. If you wanted to come to their retreat centers, the first one had to be a 10-day retreat. And so I did one of these things like, oh, I want to go. I don't think I can do it. Oh, I want to go. I don't think I can do this. And then it turned out that my son wanted to go. And that's really special, getting to go on a retreat with your son for 10 days, right? So he wanted to go. So then I wanted to go, and we both signed up, and in my mind chatter was, I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm not going to be able to do this. And I sat down, and sure enough, those first 4 or 5 days, all I could think of was escape routes. How do I get out of here? How do I get... But, you know, my son was there, so I wasn't going to let him see Mom, the minister, having to leave the retreat, right? I think I was in seminary, so about to be minister. Later I learned, once we could talk, that he spent the first 4 or 5 days wanting to leave, but he wasn't about to up and leave and have his mom, the would-be minister, see him leave. And it turns out that's a pretty common reaction. Those first 4 or 5 days are a hurdle. But what happened for me by the end of that retreat, that silence, was so precious. It was so precious, and it felt so much the truth of who I was, that I realized that most of what I say, like most of it, absolutely does not need to be said. It serves no good purpose. I mean, but there's this cultural thing, and maybe just even a genetic or tribal thing, to just keep talking. You know, if there's some silence, let's fill it with talk. So the Buddha taught to be more deliberate, to speak in those moments when you truly have something to say. And that was so easy to do after this 10-day retreat. In fact, that was the natural thing to do. And then a few weeks went by, and I went back to default. But the memory of that is strong. It's very, very strong. So doubling back, I kind of lost my order. Well, it's like the wheel. It's all connected. You know, the importance of embracing silence and avoiding idle chatter is one way of talking about this principle. But the other piece of it is there are times when we absolutely have to speak. And that's part of the teaching too. There are times when what we have to say is not idle chatter at all. What we have to say is the very truth of our being expressed, the truth of what we are about being expressed, right? And so in those times, right speech says we must stand up, we must have a voice, and we must speak. Now, I don't know how many people watched, I skipped this, I'm sorry. David Roth, who's coming in June, has a song, and I couldn't find the lyrics, so this is an approximation, but basically he sings about when to speak and when not to speak. And his lyrics say something like, is it necessary? Is it true? And is it kind? And I really love the way in those simple words he captures the teachings of the Buddha. So is it necessary? If it's necessary, it's not idle chatter. If it's true, it needs to be spoken. And if it is to be spoken, it needs to be spoken with kindness. So I like this. That's the easiest one to remember for me. So yesterday, there were teenagers and people who were supporting them, not only in Washington, D.C., that's where this picture is, but throughout the world. And these kids and those who support them have a truth that they are saying, and it is a necessary thing. It needs to be voiced. They have grown up afraid for their lives, and it is necessary for them to stand up and speak their truth, to say enough. We want change. And I was able to watch for maybe a couple hours. There's recordings that show you full-length speeches. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to some of these kids, you have to. There was one girl, so many of them spoke so beautifully from the heart, eloquently, and they were clear. And that's how it is when we speak what is necessary and what is true. We are clear. We do not ramble. We do not carry on. We do not get engaged in knee-jerk reactions. We stand there and we speak a truth that commands people's attention. For that is who we are. We are creators. And we create from that center of our being, and our speech is one way we do that. In the Christian tradition, the teaching is, in the beginning was the Word, right? In the beginning of anything that we create is the Word. And these kids got it. There was one girl from South LA that she's right up there among the top 3 or 4 speakers I've ever heard in my life. She was absolutely amazing. How many people heard her? A few. Wasn't she great? Absolutely. And they speak their truth with such power. So Buddhism by no means wants us all to turn into silent monks or to be meek all the time. There is a strength that comes out of our equanimity. There is a strength that comes out of our clarity. And these kids, it's like there's hope for our world. There is really hope for our world. I have a few more pictures if you didn't get to see any of it. I like this on their hands. They say, I can't even read it now. Never again. Yeah. So this is right speech. This is right speech. It goes beyond just fasting from criticism and condemnation. It includes that. But it calls us to speak what needs to be spoken. And I'm sure each of us in our lives have a truth or have had a truth that's needed to be spoken, right? And it's finding that center and speaking from that center that brings power into the situation, that is the beginning of change. It is the word that is in the beginning. So is it necessary? Is it true? And is it kind? So the other side of speaking this powerful truth is remembering that we all have the legal right to remain silent, right? Because some of the things we say really do act against us, don't they? So when there isn't that compelling voice that needs to speak, we do have the right just to remain silent. And that silence in the picture is a silence that comes from the strength of equanimity. It is not the silence that's, I'm in a huff and I'm not going to talk to you. There's a very big difference, right? So right speech can be very silent, or right speech can be a powerful voice. Is it necessary? Is it true? Is it kind? And of course, in unity, we're taught that truth has many layers, many levels. So not only does it have to be true in terms of, what just happened? Did you really have to go to the dry cleaner or not? Or, it's not just on that level. It is a question of, is this aligned with the deepest truth? Especially when I use the words I am. Right speech demands that when I use the words I am, I follow it with the truth that I am an expression of the divine. To say I am stupid goes completely against right speech. The I am is the way God named God's self to Moses, right? I am that I am. So when we use that, right speech demands that we follow those two words only with truth. I am the expression of divine love. I'm a beautiful child of God. I am filled with possibilities. I have a power within me. I am that power, right? Always, right speech demands that we ask these types of questions and that we allow ourselves to be guided when to speak and what to speak. And the last question, is it kind, of course, asks us is there love in what I'm saying? And of course, love is the deepest and most profound truth about our spiritual nature. So as you move through this discernment process, this is probably the most important thing. Does this align with the love that I am? Namaste.